blood dripping from frozen fingers was what finally woke me up. 2 years I'd bled for a man who wouldn't even offer a single band-aid. People call it unrequited love. I call it a self-inflicted prison. I abandoned my dignity, alienated my family, and emptied my bank account just to breathe in Declan's shadow. But lying on that sterile hospital bed, burning with fever he caused, my desperate past self simply died. What took her place was cold, clear, and utterly ruthless. This is how I disappeared. Looking back, I don't recognize the girl I used to be. If I could, I would reach back through time, grab her by the shoulders, and shake her until her teeth rattled. I met Declan Hayes at Sterling and Cross, a high-pressure corporate strategy firm in downtown Boston. I was a junior analyst, hungry and sharp. He was a senior consultant armed with a devastating smile and a reputation for crushing anyone who got in his way. From the moment he leaned against my cubicle and asked to borrow my pen, I was entirely, hopelessly doomed. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing descent into madness. At first, it was just doing him small favors, grabbing his black coffee from the cafe across the street, proofreading his pitch decks. Then it escalated. I started staying at the office until midnight, doing the heavy lifting on his projects while he took the credit. I convinced myself I was being a supportive partner, even though we weren't partners. We weren't anything. "You're indispensable, Chloe," he would say, his voice a low, guttural purr that sent electricity straight down my spine. That one word, indispensable, was the drug I lived on. My entire existence became a shrine to his comfort. I memorized his schedule, his allergies, the exact brand of scotch he drank when he was stressed. I spent my own meager salary buying him a $600 Tissot watch for his birthday, a gift he barely glanced at before tossing it onto his cluttered desk. My brother Liam watched my deterioration with mounting horror. "You're a doormat, Chloe," Liam snapped one Sunday, watching me cancel our family dinner because Declan had a crisis with the spreadsheet. "He doesn't respect you. He doesn't even see you. You're just a highly functioning appliance to him." I hung up on Liam that day. I didn't speak to my brother for 6 months. That's what obsession does to you. It isolates you, cutting away the people who actually love you so you can focus entirely on the parasite feeding off your soul. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday in late November. Boston was being battered by a freak ice storm. The streets were slick with freezing rain, the wind howling off the harbor like a wounded animal. Declan was supposed to present Project Chimera to the board of directors the next morning. It was the pitch that would guarantee his promotion to partner. He had left the master flash drive at the office and he called me at 11 p.m., his voice laced with panic. "Chloe, I need it. I'm at my apartment. I can't leave. My car won't start in this ice. You have to bring it to me." He lived in Beacon Hill, a 40-minute train ride and a 20-minute uphill walk from my place. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the drive, threw on a thin trench coat, and ran out into the freezing deluge. I didn't even grab an umbrella. By the time I reached his street, I was soaked to the bone. My teeth were chattering so violently, I thought they would crack. The freezing rain felt like needles against my face, and my hands were entirely numb, my knuckles scraped and bleeding from a fall on the icy pavement. I stood under the flickering streetlight across from his brownstone, clutching the drive to my chest. I pulled out my phone with frozen fingers and dialed his number. "I'm outside," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Great," he replied briskly. "Stay there. I'm pulling up." "Wait. Pulling up?" A sleek black Audi turned the corner, its headlights cutting through the icy rain. It wasn't broken down. He had been out. The car pulled up to the curb right in front of me. The passenger side window rolled down. Declan didn't lean over. He just extended his hand across the passenger seat. Through the pouring rain and the fogged glass, I saw a silhouette sitting in the passenger seat. A woman. She was wrapped in a thick, luxurious coat, her face obscured by the shadows, but I could hear her soft laughter over the hum of the engine. "Give it here, Chloe." "I'm freezing," Declan barked. I stepped off the curb, the icy water soaking through my boots. I placed the flash drive into his outstretched hand. He didn't look at my bleeding fingers. He didn't look at my soaked, shivering frame. He didn't say thank you. "See you at work," he muttered, and the window rolled up. The Audi accelerated away, its rear tire hitting a massive puddle in the gutter. A wave of freezing, Dirty street water splashed over my legs. I stood there in the dark, the freezing rain beating down on me, staring at the red tail lights disappearing into the Boston night. I stood there for an hour. I couldn't move. It wasn't just the cold that froze me. It was the absolute crushing weight of my own pathetic reality settling over me. I was nothing to him. Less than nothing. I don't remember the walk back to the train station. I don't remember unlocking my apartment door. The next memory I have is a blinding white light and the rhythmic, terrifying beep of a heart monitor. I opened my eyes and the world swam into focus. The sterile smell of iodine and bleach assaulted my senses. I was in a hospital bed. Liam was sitting in a plastic chair in the corner, his head in his hands. He looked like he had aged 10 years. When he heard the rustle of my sheets, his head snapped up. His eyes were red-rimmed and furious. "You've been unconscious for 3 days, Liam said, his voice a jagged whisper. "Severe pneumonia, a core body temperature so low the doctors were preparing me for the worst. Your kidneys nearly shut down, Chloe." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. "Declan," I rasped out. It was a pathetic reflex, an addiction I hadn't yet kicked. Liam's face hardened into a mask of pure disgust. "He didn't call. He didn't come. When I called your office to tell them you were in the ICU, his assistant told me he was busy celebrating his promotion." I closed my eyes. In the darkness behind my eyelids, something began to shift. It was a strange physical sensation, like a heavy iron chain snapping deep inside my chest. During those 3 days of fever dreams, navigating the blurry line between life and death, the desperate, obsessive girl who lived for Declan Hayes had quietly passed away. What remained in her place felt different, hollow, but remarkably light. The desperate need for his validation, the frantic anxiety that usually plagued my stomach, it was all gone, replaced by a cold crystalline clarity. 2 days later, I was sitting up in bed eating flavorless hospital jello when the door to my room swung open. It was Declan. He was wearing a custom navy suit, looking immaculate as always. He didn't carry flowers. He didn't look worried. In fact, he looked profoundly annoyed, checking his Rolex as he stepped into the room. "Chloe, finally," he sighed, standing at the foot of my bed. "I've been trying to get a hold of you for 48 hours. The transition team needs the access codes for the Chimera database. You locked the master spreadsheet on your personal drive before you went MIA." He didn't ask how I was. He didn't comment on the 4-needle bruised into my hand or the pale, sickly hue of my skin. He was just agitated about a password. A week ago, my heart would have hammered in my chest. I would have tripped over my words, apologizing profusely for being a burden, for getting sick, for inconveniencing his monumental success. Now, I just looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the slight arrogance in the tilt of his chin, the coldness in his eyes, the absolute void where a human soul should have been. He looked small. "Well," he prompted, snapping his fingers lightly. "Chloe, I'm on a tight schedule. I have a dinner reservation at OYA in 20 minutes. The password," I said, my voice shockingly steady, "is Chimera 2026. He tapped it into his phone immediately. "Great. Look, feel better? Okay. The office is a mess without you handling the admin stuff." He turned on his heel and walked out. The door clicked shut. He didn't know it, but in those 30 seconds, he had finalized his own execution in my life. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. It was the smile of someone who had just woken up from a nightmare and realized they held the matches to burn the haunted house down. I reached for my phone on the bedside table and called my brother. "Liam," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "I need your help. I'm leaving Boston." "Where are you going?" Liam asked, the relief evident in his breath. "I don't know yet, but by the time I'm discharged on Friday, I need to not exist here anymore." Disappearing is an art form. It requires a meticulous, unsentimental approach to dismantling your own life. The hospital discharged me on a crisp Friday morning. Liam drove me straight to the apartment I shared with my roommate, Sarah. Sarah and I had been friends since our sophomore year at Boston College. She was a fashion buyer, always impeccably dressed, bubbly, and supposedly my confidant. I had cried on her shoulder 100 times over Declan's coldness. She had always stroked my hair and told me I deserved better, that Declan was just complicated. When Liam and I walked into the apartment, Sarah leaped off the velvet sofa, her face twisting into an exaggerated mask of pity. "Oh my God, Chloe," she gasped, rushing forward to hug me. She smelled strongly of Santal 33. I was so worried. Liam wouldn't tell me anything. He just said you were sick. "Look at you. You look so frail. You need soup. I'm going to make you soup." "I'm fine, Sarah," I said smoothly, pulling back from her embrace. The new me didn't miss a beat. "Just need to pack some things. I'm going to stay with Liam for a bit." "Of course, whatever you need," she cooed. "Actually, I have to run out to a fitting, but I'll be back tonight. We'll have a movie night, okay?" She grabbed her designer purse and bustled out the door. Liam went downstairs to grab some moving boxes from his truck. I was left alone in the apartment. I walked into my bedroom and started pulling clothes from the closet. My mind was purely tactical. I was calculating lease breakage fees, mentally drafting my resignation email to Sterling and Cross. As I walked past Sarah's room to grab some packing tape we kept in the hall closet, I noticed her MacBook propped open on her unmade bed. The screen was awake, disabled from sleeping. I wouldn't normally snoop. The old Chloe was too polite, too timid. But the new Chloe felt a strange prickle at the back of her neck, a gut instinct honed by the sudden shattering of all my illusions. I stepped into her room and looked at the screen. The Messages app was open, synced to her phone. The cursor was blinking in a chat thread pinned to the top. The contact name was Dee. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I scrolled up. "D board meeting killed it. Partner status confirmed. Sarah. Told you. Proud of you, babe. Drinks tonight to celebrate. D.O. Yeah. At 8. Wear the red dress. Sarah. Done. Did your shadow finally surface? D. Yeah. Tracked her down at Mass General. Squeezed the passcode out of her. Looked like a walking corpse. Sarah. Laugh my ass off. You are evil. Did she know I was in the car that night? D. No clue. I thought she was going to freeze to death staring at us. Pathetic. Sarah. Honestly, it's her own fault. I had to literally duck under the dashboard so she wouldn't see me. I've been pretending to feel sorry for her for 2 years, Declan. I deserve an Oscar. D. You deserve a lot of things. See you at 8. I stood perfectly still in the quiet bedroom. The air around me seemed to crystallize. The woman in the passenger seat, the luxurious coat, the soft laughter over the engine. It was Sarah, my best friend. The woman who had wiped my tears and told me I was worth more, all while sleeping with the man I was destroying myself for, all while they mocked my agony for their own amusement. A lesser woman would have smashed the laptop. A lesser woman would have waited for Sarah to come home and screamed until her vocal cords shredded. I would have done that a week ago. Instead, I took out my phone. I took crystal clear photographs of the entire conversation. I made sure the timestamps, the contact info, and the horrific dialogue were all perfectly legible. Then, I closed her laptop exactly as I had found it. Liam came upstairs with the boxes. "How much are we taking?" he asked, dropping them in my room. "Everything that matters," I said. "Leave the rest." We packed like phantoms. I took my clothes, my essential documents, and my grandmother's jewelry. I left the furniture. I left the expensive espresso machine I had bought for the kitchen. I left the $600 watch box, which I had found shoved in the back of Declan's desk and kept like a pathetic souvenir, throwing it straight into the kitchen garbage. By 3 p.m., my room was empty of my presence. I sat at the kitchen island and opened my laptop. I drafted a 2-sentence email to the HR director at Sterling and Cross. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position. Send my final paycheck to the forwarding address on file. I didn't copy Declan. I didn't offer a transition period. Then I took out a blank piece of paper and a pen. I wrote a note to Sarah. "Sarah, rent is paid through the end of the month. I've moved out. Enjoy the red dress at Oya. Try not to duck under the dashboard next time. It ruins your posture. Chloe." I placed the note on the kitchen counter right next to a printed-out full-color copy of their text messages. Liam was waiting in the hallway. "You ready?" I looked around the apartment one last time. The place where I had shed so many tears, harbored so many delusions, and lived alongside a traitor. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the incredible weightless sensation of freedom. Yes, I said. We walked out and I locked the door behind me. I tossed my set of keys into the hallway trash chute. I didn't block their numbers immediately. That would be too predictable. I waited until I was sitting in Terminal B at Logan International Airport, holding a one-way ticket to Austin, Texas, a city where I knew absolutely no one. A city bathed in relentless, unyielding sunshine. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was 8:15 p.m. Sarah is calling. I watched it ring, then I hit decline. Declan is calling. Decline. I opened my settings, changed my number, and dropped the old SIM card into my empty coffee cup. As they called the boarding group for my flight, I stood up, slung my bag over my shoulder, and walked toward the gate. I didn't look back, not even once. Starting over isn't a cinematic montage set to upbeat music. It is brutal, exhausting, and fiercely lonely. I rented a tiny sun-baked studio apartment above a quiet bakery on East 6th Street. For the first 2 weeks, I barely slept. I sat on my mattress on the floor, my laptop illuminating the dark and meticulously rebuilt my professional identity. I didn't apply to entry-level analyst positions. I had been doing the work of a senior partner for 2 years. I was going to get paid for it. I targeted boutique crisis management and acquisition firms, places that thrived on high stakes and ruthless efficiency. That was how I found Harrison Caldwell. Harrison was a fifth-generation Texan who ran Caldwell and Forge, an aggressive venture capital firm specializing in hostile takeovers and corporate restructuring. He was 40, built like a linebacker, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. My interview with him wasn't an interview. It was a sparring match. "Your resume is thin, Chloe," Harrison said, tossing my immaculate printed sheet onto his massive oak desk. He leaned back, sizing me up with piercing gray eyes. 3 years at Sterling and Cross, junior title. Yet you're sitting in my office asking for a senior strategy director position in equity. Why shouldn't I laugh you out of the building? I didn't blink. I didn't fidget. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of his desk. "Because, Mr. Caldwell, the titles on that paper are a fiction," I replied, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of intimidation. "Look at the addendum. I was the primary architect of Project Chimera. I drafted the merger protocols for the Vanguard acquisition. I managed the crisis fallout when the tech sector dipped last quarter. My former superior took the credit, but I hold the blueprints in my head. You don't need a resume. You need a weapon. I am the weapon." Harrison stared at me for a long, silent minute. Then a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You start Monday," he said. "If you fail, I fire you publicly. If you succeed, you get everything you just asked for." "Deal," I said, standing up and offering my hand. I didn't just succeed. I dominated. The obsession and relentless drive I had once poured into making Declan Hayes comfortable, I now poured entirely into my own empire. I worked 90-hour weeks, not out of desperation, but out of a ferocious appetite for victory. I stripped failing companies down to their studs, restructured their debt, and turned massive profits for the firm. I never made coffee for anyone. I never stayed late to fix a colleague's mistake unless I was getting a percentage of their bonus. I was polite, professional, and completely terrifying to the junior staff. Within 18 months, Harrison didn't just see me as an employee, he saw me as his equal. On a humid Tuesday in September, almost 2 years exactly after I left Boston, Harrison poured 2 glasses of 20-year-old bourbon in his office. "To the newest junior partner at Caldwell and Forge," he said, handing me a heavy crystal glass. I took a sip, the amber liquid burning pleasantly down my throat. I wore a tailored white Saint Laurent suit, a stark contrast to the damp, pathetic trench coat I had worn the night my life ended. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Austin skyline. I had wealth, power, and absolute autonomy. But true justice, I was about to learn, has a funny way of delivering itself right to your doorstep. Rumors in the corporate world travel faster than light, especially when they involve a spectacular implosion. While I was building my fortress in Texas, the rotten foundation I had left behind in Boston was finally giving way. I kept tabs on Sterling and Cross, not out of longing, but purely out of professional curiosity. The industry blogs and financial whisper networks painted a vivid, pathetic picture. Project Chimera, the promotion project Declan had stolen from me, was a disaster. I had built the framework, yes, but executing it required a nuanced understanding of international compliance laws that Declan simply did not possess. Without me there to silently fix his arrogant miscalculations, the project bled millions in its first year. A former colleague of mine, a gossipy underwriter named Brenda, eventually tracked down my new LinkedIn profile. Her messages were a goldmine of schadenfreude. "Chloe, you wouldn't believe the mess here," Brenda messaged me one evening. "Declan is completely falling apart. The board is threatening to strip his partnership. He's been throwing junior analysts under the bus, but Thomas, the CEO, knows the truth. Declan is incompetent." I read the message while sipping espresso on the balcony of my penthouse apartment. A faint cold smile touched my lips. "And what about Sarah?" I typed back. I hadn't thought about my former best friend in months, but the memory of her laughter in that Audi still carried a faint bitter echo. Brenda's reply came almost instantly. "Oh, that is the best part. They made their relationship public about a month after you vanished." It was nauseating. But once Declan started failing at work, he turned completely toxic. He blamed her for his stress. She lost her job at the fashion house because she got caught using corporate funds to pay for Declan's stress relief trips to Aspen. They are miserable together. They scream at each other in the lobby. She looks exhausted. It was the ultimate inescapable consequence of their own nature. They had built their relationship on the thrill of betrayal and the shared mockery of my loyalty. Take away the secrecy and the victim, and all they had left was each other's inherent selfishness. A parasite cannot survive when it attaches itself to another parasite. They simply starved together. I closed my laptop, feeling a profound sense of closure. I assumed that would be the end of it, a satisfying footnote in the story of my life. I underestimated the universe's appetite for irony. 3 weeks later, Harrison called an emergency meeting in our glass-walled boardroom. The firm was looking to aggressively expand our portfolio on the East Coast. "We have a unique opportunity," Harrison announced to the partners, projecting a financial dossier onto the main screen. "A major Boston-based strategy firm is hemorrhaging cash. Their board is terrified of bankruptcy. They are looking for a discreet bailout, essentially offering themselves up for an acquisition at a fraction of their market value." The logo flashed on the screen. The silver interlocking S and C, sterling and cross. My heart didn't skip a beat. My palms didn't sweat. Instead, my mind went perfectly, beautifully still. "They have a solid client list," Harrison continued, completely unaware of my history as I had never disclosed the specific name of my former employer to anyone at the firm. "The problem is upper management. It's bloated, incompetent, and drowning in bad investments. We buy them, gut the suite, and absorb the assets." Harrison looked down the table directly at me. "Chloe, you know the East Coast market better than anyone here. I want you to lead the acquisition. I want you to handle the due diligence, and I want you to be the one holding the axe when we restructure their leadership." I looked at the projected logo. I thought of the freezing rain. I thought of the $600 watch in the trash. I thought of the 3 days I spent dying in a hospital bed while Declan celebrated his stolen victory. "I would be delighted, Harrison," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Set up the initial summit, have their representatives come to us." The Austin heat was particularly punishing the day Sterling and Cross arrived to beg for their professional lives. They had sent a delegation of 3. Thomas, the aging CEO who looked like he hadn't slept in a year, a nervous legal counsel, and the senior partner directly responsible for the division that was bankrupting them, Declan Hayes. I was in my private office when the receptionist called to announce their arrival in boardroom A. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my charcoal Dior suit. I checked my reflection in the glass window. My hair, once frizzy and carelessly pulled back, was now styled into a sleek, impenetrable bob. My makeup was sharp, my posture commanding. I looked like a woman who owned the world. "Send them in," I told the receptionist. "Offer them water. Make them wait exactly 15 minutes. Psychological warfare was part of the Caldwell and Forge brand. You let desperate men sit in a quiet air-conditioned room with nothing to look at but their own impending failure. When the 15 minutes were up, I picked up the thick leather-bound dossier containing the grim financial reality of Sterling and Cross. I walked down the hallway, the sharp click of my Louis Vuitton heels echoing off the marble floors like the ticking of a bomb. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of boardroom A. Thomas and the lawyer stood up immediately, offering nervous, respectful smiles. Declan was sitting in a chair facing the window, rubbing his temples, looking profoundly aggravated. He hadn't aged well. The arrogant charm that had once captivated me was gone, replaced by deep lines of stress and a slight unhealthy puffiness around his jaw. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "Welcome to Caldwell & Forge. I am Chloe Evans, junior partner and lead director of acquisitions. Please sit." Declan froze. It was a physical full-body flinch. Slowly, as if moving underwater, he turned around in his chair. When his eyes met mine, all the color instantly drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, a demon, and his own executioner all rolled into one impeccably dressed package. "See, Chloe," he stammered. It was the first time I had ever heard Declan Hayes stutter. "Mr. Hayes," I replied, my tone entirely professional, completely devoid of recognition or warmth. I didn't smile. I walked to the head of the long mahogany table and placed my dossier down. I didn't look at him again. I directed my attention entirely to the CEO. "Thomas, thank you for making the trip down," I said. "I've reviewed the preliminary financials you sent over. Frankly, the situation is far more catastrophic than your initial prospectus suggested." Thomas looked confused, glancing back and forth between me and his petrified senior partner. You know each other?" "Briefly," I said dismissively, flicking a speck of invisible dust off my sleeve. "A lifetime ago, irrelevant to the current disaster we are here to discuss. Let's talk about Project Chimera, shall we? The division, Mr. Hayes here oversees, which currently accounts for 60% of your firm's total deficit." For the next 2 hours, I clinically, methodically, and ruthlessly dissected Declan's career. I laid out every bad decision, every overlooked compliance regulation, every arrogant misstep he had taken over the past 2 years. Because I had built his foundation, I knew exactly where all the structural weaknesses were. I tore down the facade of the brilliant boy wonder right in front of his CEO. Declan tried to defend himself once. About 40 minutes in, he slammed his hand on the table. "You're twisting the data, Chloe. The market conditions?" "I'm not Chloe to you in this room, Mr. Hayes." I cut him off, my voice snapping like a whip. The sheer authority in my tone made him flinch back into his chair. "I am Miss Evans, and the data is absolute. You authorized a massive capital expenditure without securing the secondary funding tier. It wasn't the market, it was your fundamental incompetence." Thomas looked sick. By the end of the meeting, it was abundantly clear Caldwell and Forge would acquire Sterling and Cross for pennies on the dollar, but with strict conditions. "We will assume your debts and integrate your client list," I told Thomas, closing the dossier. "However, Caldwell and Forge does not absorb liabilities. The suite will be completely purged upon signing. That includes you, Thomas, with a modest severance, and it certainly includes Mr. Hayes, effective immediately with 0 severance due to gross negligence." Declan stood up, his face flushed purple with rage and humiliation. "You can't do this. You set this up. This is a vendetta." "This is business, Declan," I said smoothly, finally looking him dead in the eye. "You brought a bankrupt firm to my table. I am simply cleaning up the mess, something I used to do for free, if I recall." I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "My legal team will send the drafted contracts by morning. Have a safe flight back to the freezing rain, gentlemen." I turned and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. As the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, I heard Thomas's voice, furious and defeated, echoing from inside. "Pack your desk, Declan. You're done." The karma didn't end there. 2 days later, as the acquisition news hit the financial presses, my assistant buzzed my intercom. "Miss Evans, there is a woman in the lobby demanding to see you. She says it's an emergency. A Sarah Jenkins." I paused, my pen hovering over a document. Sarah, she had actually flown down here. The desperation must have been absolute. "Send her up to my office," I said. 10 minutes later, My office door opened. Sarah stood in the doorway. The bubbly, impeccably dressed fashion buyer was gone. She looked haggard. Her designer clothes looked slightly rumpled. Her roots were showing. And she was carrying a cheap canvas tote bag instead of her usual Prada. She walked in and immediately burst into tears. The kind of ugly heaving sobs meant to elicit pity. "Chloe. Oh my God, Chloe, please," she begged, stepping forward, but stopping when I didn't offer a shred of comfort. I simply sat behind my desk, watching her with clinical detachment. "Hello, Sarah. I see you didn't wear the red dress." She winced as if I had struck her. "Chloe, please, you have to understand, Declan manipulated me. He told me you two meant nothing, that you were just a crazy coworker who was obsessed with him. I was weak, but he ruined me. I lost my job because of him. And now that you've fired him, he has nothing. He's drowning in debt. We're getting evicted from his brownstone." She stepped closer, placing her trembling hands on the edge of my desk. "I know you're angry. You have every right to be, but I'm begging you. You have so much power now. You're rich. You're a partner. Can't you offer me a job? Even an assistant position? I have nowhere else to go. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I am so sorry." I let the silence stretch. I let her sit in the agonizing vulnerability of her plea. 2 years ago, I would have hugged her. I would have believed her tears. I would have split my own paycheck to make sure she didn't go hungry. "Sarah," I said quietly, leaning back in my leather chair. "Do you remember the ice storm?" She froze, her tears momentarily stalling. "What?" "The ice storm November when you were sitting in the passenger seat of Declan's Audi." She swallowed hard, looking at the floor. I told you I was manipulated." "I was bleeding, Sarah," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft whisper. I had fallen on the ice. My hands were bleeding, my clothes were soaked, and I was shivering so hard I could barely stand. I spent 3 days in the ICU, dying of pneumonia because of that night. I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto hers. "And while I was standing outside in the freezing rain, bleeding for a man who didn't care if I lived or died, you were sitting in the warm passenger seat, laughing." Sarah began to tremble violently. "Chloe, no. I didn't know. You ducked under the dashboard so I wouldn't see you," I stating the fact from her own text messages. "You knew exactly what was happening. You watched me freeze and you laughed." I picked up my pen and went back to signing the document in front of me. "I don't hold vendettas, Sarah. I simply don't reward parasites. Security will escort you out. If you ever contact me or step foot in this building again, I will have my legal team file a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin. Chloe, please. I have nothing," she screamed as 2 burly security guards entered my office, summoned by the silent panic button under my desk. "Then you finally have exactly what you deserve," I said, not looking up as they grabbed her by the arms and dragged her, sobbing and pleading, out of my office. The door closed, shutting out the noise. The silence in my office was absolute, and it was golden. 3 weeks after the contracts were signed, Harrison dispatched me back to Boston. It wasn't a request, it was an anointing. I was to be the executioner on the ground overseeing the physical liquidation of Sterling and Cross's redundant assets and the integration of their remaining staff into our infrastructure. Stepping off the plane at Logan, the Boston air hit me differently this time. It was late spring. The brutal, unforgiving ice that had nearly claimed my life 2 years ago was a distant memory replaced by a mild, sun-drenched afternoon. I wore a tailored midnight blue trench coat, a deliberate, ironic upgrade from the flimsy rag I had worn the night I was left to freeze in Beacon Hill. My brother Liam picked me up at the airport. He drove a new Audi SUV, a gift I had bought him after my first year at Caldwell and Forge as a silent apology for shutting him out during my darkest days. "Look at you," Liam grinned, tossing my leather weekender bag into the trunk. "The conquering queen returns. Do you need a police escort to downtown, or are you just going to part the traffic with your mind?" "Just drive, Liam." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression that I rarely used in Texas. "I have a building to gut by 9 a.m. tomorrow." The next morning, I walked into the lobby of Sterling and Cross. The silver interlocking S and C behind the reception desk looked tarnished. The atmosphere in the building was thick with anxiety. Rumors had been swirling for weeks about the Texas Reaper coming to clean house, but none of the mid-level staff knew my identity yet. I swiped my new black Absolute Access keycard at the turnstiles. The security guard, a man named Gregory, who used to watch me sprint in at midnight with armfuls of files, didn't even recognize me. I walked into the main elevator bank and pressed the button for the 50th floor, the executive suite. When the doors opened, the chaos was palpable. Assistants were frantically packing boxes. Junior partners were huddled in glass offices, whispering furiously. I bypassed them all and walked straight to the corner office at the end of the hall. The nameplate beside the heavy mahogany door had already been unscrewed, leaving 2 blank holes in the drywall. This had been Declan's office. I pushed the door open. It was completely empty, save for a massive custom-built desk and a leather executive chair. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the harbor. I walked over, ran my hand along the polished wood of the desk, and sat down in the chair. It felt incredibly comfortable. "Excuse me?" A nervous voice piped up from the doorway. I turned the chair around. Standing there was a young man, probably no older than 24, clutching a stack of heavily redlined ledgers. He had dark circles under his eyes and a frantic, terrified energy. I vaguely recognized him. He had been an intern right before I resigned. His name was Arthur. "This office is restricted," Arthur stammered, adjusting his glasses. "Manage said no one goes in here until the liquidators arrive." "I am the liquidator," I said calmly. "Come in, Arthur." "Shut the door." He blinked, his eyes widening as he finally processed my face. "Chloe, wait. Chloe Evans. But you used to work in the bullpen on the 42nd floor. You vanished." I relocated, I corrected smoothly, motioning to the chair across from the desk. "Sit down. Let's talk about the Vanguard accounts." For the next 3 hours, I interrogated Arthur. I didn't care about the executives. They were already dead weight. I was looking for the hidden talent, the pack mules, who had been carrying the firm while men like Declan took the credit. Arthur, it turned out, was brilliant. He was a savant with predictive algorithms and had essentially been doing Declan's job for a fraction of the pay ever since I left. "You drafted this contingency model?" I asked, tapping a perfectly structured spreadsheet. "Yes," Arthur mumbled, looking at his shoes. "Mr. Hayes told the board it was his proprietary design, but he didn't even know the macro formulas." "Declan Hayes is no longer a factor in your universe, Arthur," I stated, closing the folder. "As of this morning, you are being promoted to Senior Data Analyst for Caldwell and Forge, East Coast Division. Your salary is tripled. You answer directly to me. If anyone from the old regime tries to give you an order, you tell them to come to this office." Arthur stared at me completely speechless, a slow flush of absolute disbelief creeping up his neck. Are you serious?" "I don't make jokes during business hours," I replied. "Now get out of here and start migrating those servers." As he scrambled out of the office, looking as though he had just won the lottery, I felt a deep, resonant satisfaction. I wasn't just destroying the people who had hurt me. I was elevating the people they had stepped on. I was rebalancing the scales. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk. I went down to the street level and crossed the avenue to the upscale cafe where I had wasted countless hours of my life fetching Declan's ridiculously specific black coffee. I walked in, the familiar scent of roasted beans and expensive pastries washing over me. The same barista was working behind the counter. "Can I get a large black Americano, 2 shots of espresso, no room for milk?" The barista recited automatically as I stepped up to the register. He looked up, a friendly smile on his face. "Hey, long time no see. Picking up for Mr. Hayes?" "No," I said, my voice light and entirely free of the desperate anxiety that used to choke me in this room. "I'll have an iced matcha latte. And Mr. Hayes doesn't drink coffee anymore. He's on an involuntary sabbatical." I paid with a sleek black corporate card, tipped him $50, and walked out into the Boston sunlight. The city didn't own me anymore. I owned it. Desperation breeds a very specific kind of audacity. When you strip a narcissist of their power, their money, and their reputation, they do not self-reflect. They double down. I should have expected Declan to bite back. I just didn't expect him to be quite so stupid about it. 2 months into the integration, the dust had mostly settled. Caldwell and Forge had absorbed the profitable sectors of Sterling and Cross, and I was preparing to fly back to Austin. I was having dinner with Liam at a high-end steakhouse in the Seaport District when my burner phone, the one I kept exclusively for direct lines to Harrison, vibrated in my clutch. "We have a slight complication." Harrison's voice rumbled over the line. He didn't sound angry, just moderately inconvenienced. "I need you back at the Boston office at 8 tomorrow morning. Nathaniel Reed is flying in on the red eye." Nathaniel Reed was Caldwell and Forge's apex predator. He was the head of litigation, a towering, fiercely intelligent man from Chicago who spoke in quiet, measured tones and dismantled opposing counsel with surgical precision. If Nathaniel was flying in, someone was bleeding, and Harrison wanted him to finish the job. "What happened?" I asked, signaling the waiter for the check. "Declan Hayes just filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Caldwell and Forge and against you personally, Chloe. He's alleging corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and intellectual property theft." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "He's suing us with what money?" "He found a bottom-feeding contingency firm," Harrison explained. "He's claiming that you stole the blueprints for Project Chimera when you left 2 years ago, fed them to me, and engineered the downfall of his division so we could acquire the firm at a discount. It's a fairy tale, but it's a public fairy tale. The financial press is going to love it." "I'll handle it," I said, my eyes narrowing. "No, Nathaniel will handle the legal mechanics," Harrison corrected. "You just provide the ammunition. Bury him, Chloe. Don't leave a single bone uncrushed." The next morning, I met Nathaniel in my corner office. He was leaning against the floor-to-ceiling windows, drinking a glass of water. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, his dark hair slightly messy from the overnight flight, but his amber eyes were terrifyingly alert. "Miss Evans," Nathaniel said, turning around with a slight, respectful nod. We had crossed paths in Austin, but we had never worked a crisis together. "I've reviewed the filings. Hayes is a desperate man throwing a Hail Mary. He's a narcissist who thinks he can rewrite history," I replied, tossing my briefcase onto the desk. "He claims I stole Project Chimera. The reality is, I built it, and he couldn't maintain it without me. I have the metadata, the original drafting files, and the timestamps from my old personal drive to prove it." Nathaniel pulled out a chair and sat down, opening a thick leather portfolio. "That wins the IP theft claim. But winning isn't the objective here. Harrison wants a deterrent. We need to make this lawsuit so toxic that Hayes's own lawyers run for the hills." I sat across from him, resting my chin on my steepled fingers. I thought about Declan. I thought about the sheer arrogance it took to fail so spectacularly and still blame the woman he had used as a footstool. If Declan is desperate enough to file this, I mused aloud, he's broke. And if he's broke, he's probably been cutting corners long before the acquisition. Nathaniel's lips curved into a dangerous smile. "Now you're thinking like a lawyer. Where do we look?" I said immediately. I called Arthur into the office. The young analyst walked in looking slightly intimidated by Nathaniel's imposing presence. "Arthur," I said, bypassing the pleasantries, "I need you to dig into the discretionary spending accounts for Declan's division over the last 36 months. Specifically, look for vendor payments, consulting fees, and travel expenses that don't map to a generated revenue stream. Cross-reference them with the dates he claimed to be traveling for Vanguard." Arthur adjusted his glasses, his fingers already twitching as if typing on an invisible keyboard. "You suspect embezzlement?" "I suspect a rat trapped in a sinking ship will eat whatever it can find," I replied. "Find me the teeth marks." For 3 days, Nathaniel, Arthur, and I lived in that office. We ordered takeout, drank gallons of coffee, and tore through the financial history of Declan Hayes with a microscopic lens. Working with Nathaniel was a revelation. He didn't talk over me. He didn't take my ideas and repackage them as his own. When we debated a legal strategy, he challenged me, forced me to sharpen my arguments, and treated my intellect with profound respect. Late one night, as we were poring over a stack of redacted wire transfers, our hands brushed over a file folder. I pulled back slightly, looking up at him. The ambient light of the city illuminated the sharp angles of his jaw. "You're relentless, Chloe," he said softly, his amber eyes locking onto mine. It wasn't an insult. It was the highest form of praise. I have to be, I replied, my voice equally quiet. Softness is a luxury I can no longer afford. There is a difference between being soft and being human, Nathaniel noted, leaning back in his chair. You don't have to be made of stone to be strong. You just have to know who is allowed to touch the fire. Before I could process the gravity of that statement, Arthur burst into the office holding a stack of freshly printed spreadsheets. I found it, Arthur breathed, his eyes wide. It's not just teeth marks. It's the whole carcass. Nathaniel and I stood up, crowding around Arthur's findings. Look at these vendor payouts. Arthur pointed to a series of highlighted rows. 6 figures over 2 years paid to a boutique styling and consulting agency called Jenkins & Company. The services rendered are listed as client visual branding and executive wardrobe acquisition. My blood ran cold and then instantly boiled into pure adrenaline. Jenkins. Sarah Jenkins, I whispered. My former best friend, the woman in the passenger seat. I pulled the articles of incorporation for Jenkins & Company, Arthur continued, slamming a legal document onto the desk. The sole proprietor is Sarah Jenkins. The business address is Declan Hayes's residential brownstone. There are no actual clients, no deliverables. They were creating fake invoices and approving them through his division to funnel corporate funds directly into their personal bank accounts. Nathaniel let out a low whistle. Wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, tax evasion. They weren't just terrible at their jobs. They were committing federal felonies. I looked at the documents. The sheer breathtaking audacity of their crimes settling over me. They had mocked my poverty while using stolen money to fund the glamorous lifestyle they flaunted in my face. I looked up at Nathaniel. The ice around my heart wasn't melting. It was sharpening into a blade. Nathaniel, I said, my voice steady and completely void of mercy. Schedule the deposition. A deposition is a legally mandated conversation where you watch a liar realize they are trapped in a corner. We held it in the largest conference room at our newly branded Caldwell and Forge Boston headquarters. The morning sun was aggressively bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished oak table. Declan walked in 30 minutes late, a pathetic attempt at a power play. He wore a suit that looked expensive but slightly rumpled, a visual representation of his current state. His lawyer, a sweaty, anxious man named Miller, trailed behind him. Declan sneered when he saw me sitting next to Nathaniel. He still thought this was a game he could win through sheer arrogance. He still thought I was the trembling girl holding a flash drive in the rain. Miss Evans, Declan said, sitting across from me, radiating false confidence. Enjoying the corner office you stole? I'm enjoying the view, Mr. Hayes, I replied placidly. The air is much cleaner when the trash has been removed. Declan's jaw tightened, but Nathaniel stepped in immediately, asserting his dominance over the room. Let the record show that the deponent, Mr. Declan Hayes, is present, Nathaniel stated. His voice a deep, resonant rumble that demanded absolute authority. Mr. Hayes, you are under oath. You are alleging that my client Caldwell and Forge and specifically Miss Chloe Evans stole proprietary algorithms to engineer the devaluation of sterling and cross. That is correct, Declan said smoothly. She had access to my files. She took them, sabotaged the Vanguard accounts, and fed the data to her new bosses. Nathaniel spent the next hour walking Declan through his own lies. He let Declan build his house of cards. Let him meticulously stack every false allegation, every fabricated timeline, and every arrogant assumption. I sat perfectly still, watching the man I used to worship perjure himself into a prison sentence. So to summarize, Nathaniel said, closing his first file folder. You claim you were a victim of a sophisticated financial sabotage campaign orchestrated by Miss Evans, a campaign that caused the utter ruin of your division. Yes, Declan said, leaning back, looking immensely pleased with himself. Nathaniel didn't blink. He reached down to his briefcase, pulled out a thick red-bound folder, and dropped it onto the center of the table with a heavy, deafening thud. Then can you explain to me, Mr. Hayes? Nathaniel asked, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, why you were approving 6-figure invoices to a fraudulent shell company registered to your girlfriend, Sarah Jenkins, for a period of 24 months prior to the acquisition. The color vanished from Declan's face so fast it looked as though he had been physically struck. The smug smile shattered. Miller, his lawyer, frantically grabbed the red folder and flipped it open. His eyes darted across the printed wire transfers, the fake invoices, and the articles of incorporation. What is this? This is entirely outside the scope of the intellectual property claim. This is the defense's counterclaim, Nathaniel countered, leaning over the table. We are establishing a pattern of gross financial misconduct and embezzlement. Mr. Hayes didn't need our help to bankrupt his division. He was busy robbing it blind to buy designer coats and finance luxury vacations. Declan was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically between me and Nathaniel. This is fabricated. You made this up. We subpoenaed the bank records. Declan, I finally spoke, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. We know about Jenkins and Company. We know about the wire transfers to the offshore account in the Caymans. We know everything. Declan looked at me. Genuine unadulterated terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. Chloe, you can't. If you release this, I go to prison. You should have thought about that before you filed a frivolous lawsuit to slander my name, I said. Mr. Miller, Nathaniel addressed the sweating lawyer. I suggest you take a 10-minute recess to confer with your client because my next call isn't to a judge to dismiss this ridiculous lawsuit. My next call is to the FBI field office for white-collar crime. Miller practically dragged Declan out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, the heavy, suffocating silence evaporated. I let out a long, shuddering breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The tension in my shoulders finally cracked. Nathaniel reached across the table and placed his hand gently over mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and completely steady. You did it, he said softly. He's finished. He finished himself, I replied, looking down at our hands. I just handed him the shovel. 15 minutes later, Miller returned to the room. Declan was not with him. Miller looked pale and utterly defeated. My client withdraws the lawsuit with prejudice, Miller said rapidly, packing his briefcase. He is willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement, a non-disparagement clause, whatever you want. Just please don't forward that file to the authorities. I looked at Nathaniel. We both knew the truth. The withdrawal of the lawsuit is accepted, I told Miller, my voice cold and final, but I have a fiduciary duty as a partner at Caldwell and Forge to report the embezzlement of assets we recently acquired. The file was automatically forwarded to the federal prosecutor's office 20 minutes ago. Miller dropped his pen. He nodded slowly, understanding the absolute devastation of his client. He walked out without another word. I stood up, walked over to the massive window, and looked out over the Boston skyline. The city looked beautiful. It looked small. I had spent 2 years chasing a man who wouldn't cross a puddle for me. I had bled for him, starved for him, and nearly died for him. Now, with a few strokes of a pen, and the sheer force of my own rebuilt will, I had erased him from the board entirely. He would go to federal prison. Sarah would likely turn state's evidence to save herself. Their toxic bond finally snapping under the pressure of real consequences. Nathaniel walked up behind me, standing just close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. So, he murmured, his voice a low, comforting rumble. The Texas Reaper conquers the East Coast. What happens now, Chloe? I turned to look at him. I saw a man who didn't want to use me, who didn't want to hide me in the shadows, but a man who stood beside me in the fire and didn't flinch. Now, I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. We go back to Austin. I hear the weather is beautiful this time of year. I walked out of the conference room, leaving the ghosts of Sterling and Cross behind me forever. I didn't look back. There was absolutely nothing left to see. People often talk about hitting rock bottom as a tragedy, but they fail to mention the profound, terrifying liberation it provides. When everything you thought you wanted is stripped away, when you are left shivering and empty on the side of the road, you are finally free to decide who you are going to become. I didn't just survive Declan Hayes. I used the shattered pieces of the girl who loved him to forge a woman he couldn't touch. The blind devotion I wasted on him became the relentless ambition I invested in myself. Karma isn't a mystical force that magically descends from the sky. It is the inevitable consequence of a parasite meeting someone who finally refuses to bleed. I spent 2 years chasing a shadow. But when I stopped running, turned around, and lit the match, I realized I was the fire all along.